Hello everyone and welcome. Today's story took place in Melbourne, Australia on the 13th of February 2005. Although Valentine's Day was just around the corner, a large part of the local community was preoccupied with the disappearance of a woman who had been missing for 4 days. Her photo and a description of the vehicle she might have been driving had appeared in the media repeatedly. That Sunday morning, at around 7 a.m, a park caretaker headed into work. He didn't normally work on Sundays, but this time he had to inspect the water tanks in the park on Dallas Brooks Drive in Kings Domain, Melbourne. After completing his round, he decided to grab a coffee. He sat down at a nearby cafe when something caught his eye: a burgundy Mazda parked close by. For days, the media had been reporting on a car matching that description in connection with the missing woman. The man decided to take a closer look to see if anyone was inside the vehicle. On the front seats, he noticed quite a mess: scattered papers and an old bread roll. He immediately sensed that something was wrong. He decided to call the police to verify the registration number and check whether his suspicions were justified. And indeed they were. The parked vehicle belonged to 50-year-old Maria Korp, who had been missing for 4 days. At around 1 p.m, forensic technicians arrived to examine the car and search for any evidence. It was initially assumed that Maria had abandoned the vehicle. Despite the apparent disorder inside, the car otherwise looked ordinary and the doors had been locked. There was a major shock when officers opened the boot. Inside was a body. It was immediately clear that it was the missing woman, Maria. She appeared extremely pale and had visible injuries to her face and head. Maria was motionless and looked dead. But something astonishing happened. She suddenly took a deep breath. Maria was alive, though her condition was critical. February in Australia is summer, and it can get extremely hot. Maria had likely spent several days inside the sweltering boot, injured and with no food or water. Detective Narelle Fraser still recalled that day vividly. It was one that never left her, not because of what she saw, but because of what she smelled. As she approached the vehicle, an overwhelming stench filled the air. "From about 80 meters away we could smell something coming from the car," she later said. "It was pungent. It was really strong." Maria was rushed to the nearby Alfred Hospital. Doctors determined that she had suffered oxygen deprivation to the brain, head trauma, and severe dehydration. She was placed in a medically induced coma and put on life support. At the same time, investigators were trying to determine who was responsible for Maria's condition. She had seemed like an ordinary mother and wife, someone who lived quietly in the suburbs, was active in her church, had held a steady job for many years, and maintained a small but close circle of friends. No one had a bad word to say about her. It seemed she had no enemies. But the investigation would soon uncover long-hidden secrets. So what had happened to Maria Korp? And could her life be saved? To answer that, we must go back to the beginning. Maria was born on the 14th of January 1955 on the beautiful Portuguese island of Madeira. Her parents had 12 children in total, though sadly, 2 of them died young. The family lived in a small village on a hillside, and getting to the nearest hospital was a challenge. It was a 2 to 3 hour drive, and the family likely didn't own a car. Conditions at home were difficult. They had no running water or plumbing, and the toilet was outside. Maria's parents owned a large plot of land and ran a substantial farm. They also had a big house and were mostly self-sufficient. Maria and her siblings helped out in the fields. Like everyone else in the village, the family were devout Catholics, with faith at the center of their lives. Maria was a quiet and gentle child. She didn't think much about education. She assumed she would one day marry and have children, just like the other women in her village. Maria even knew whom she wanted to marry: her teenage sweetheart, Fernando, a boy who lived next door. They were deeply in love and planned a future together. Maria's family approved of the relationship, but Fernando's family had reservations. In the end, the wedding never took place. Fernando was sent off to the military, and tragically, he never returned. He died at the age of just 18 or 19. Maria was heartbroken and often said she would never love anyone the way she loved him. Her parents, however, were eager for her to marry, and they found her a suitor, Manuel de Gois. Maria married him at the age of 19. The young couple saw little opportunity in their village and decided to emigrate to Australia. In 1975, they made the move. They settled in the suburbs of Melbourne. At first, they both found work in a factory. Maria took to her new life quickly and soon learned English. Her husband, however, struggled with the language and didn't like their new lifestyle. He wanted to return home, but Maria refused. In 1978, their daughter Laura was born. Over time, they saved enough to buy a modest house and lived a quiet life. But everything changed in 1987, when Manuel, not yet 40, died of a heart attack. It was a devastating blow for Maria. She hadn't seen it coming. In a single day, she became a widow and a single mother. She had no time to grieve. She had to care for her daughter and keep working. As the sole breadwinner, Maria worked long hours. Eventually, she adjusted to her new reality. She was only 32 when she lost her husband. Sometime later, while working at a tire factory, she met a man who made her believe in love again, Joseph Korp, a colleague 3 years her junior. Joseph was hard-working and had a great sense of humour. He had been born in Australia, was religious, but came with a major complication. He was already married with children. Still, that didn't stop him from pursuing Maria, and she bent her own moral code to begin a relationship with him. Joseph Korp was born on the 4th of February 1958, one of 5 children. His was an average suburban family with a stable home life. Joseph was charismatic and outgoing, popular among peers. He did reasonably well in school, but was most passionate about sport. After finishing secondary school, he went to work. In 1976, he enlisted in the military, thinking it might be a good path, but just 10 months later, he was discharged for being unable to adapt. He frequently complained about the tough conditions and would sneak away to cricket matches or to see his longtime girlfriend, Leonie. Joseph desperately wanted Leonie to be his wife, and in February 1977, they married. He was 19 and she was 18. Shortly after the wedding, they informed their families that Leonie was pregnant. 2 months later, their daughter Mia was born. 3 years later, their son Stephen arrived. They lived a quiet life, with Joseph working at the tire factory where he eventually became a manager. Joseph, however, was a controlling husband. He preferred that Leonie not work, discouraged her from wearing makeup, and even tried to influence what she wore, all supposedly done in a charming way. He continued to declare his love daily, and Leonie picked him up from work every evening. To outsiders, they looked like a devoted couple, but Joseph's charm extended beyond his marriage. Before meeting Maria, he had had affairs with other women, something he reportedly bragged about to his brother. Maria began working at the factory after the death of her husband. Joseph became interested in her quite quickly, and she found herself unable to resist him, even though it went against her principles. Joseph promised he would divorce his wife, and he did. One day, Joseph told his wife, in front of their children, that he was leaving her because he was with someone else. Leonie had suspected there might be another woman, but she hadn't expected her husband to treat her that way. In 1991, Joseph officially ended his marriage, and a few months later, he married Maria. 3 years later, their son Damien was born. The family lived in the suburbs of Melbourne, along with Maria's daughter. Maria's family admitted that they were a very good couple, and that Maria loved her husband as deeply as she had once loved her first love, Fernando. From time to time, the couple would travel to Maria's home country, and during these trips, they would help her family financially. It was always Joseph who suggested buying them household appliances or other essentials. He was generous, and Maria's family were very grateful. Maria's siblings, however, thought Joseph liked to show off with his money, although it's possible they were simply jealous, as Joseph had quickly become the favourite son-in-law. Maria was deeply religious and actively involved in church life. Her husband also believed in God, though not as strongly. Interestingly, Maria was also very superstitious and visited psychics regularly. Her neighbours believed she liked being the centre of attention and often did things for show. They said she always spoke loudly, had a fiery temperament, and wasn't particularly concerned about privacy. She talked openly about her personal life. Still, they admitted she was generally all right. They also said Joseph seemed even more self-centered than Maria. He cared a lot about his appearance, enjoyed embellishing the truth at times, and often boasted about his popularity with women. But Maria didn't mind. Her husband made her feel important. He gave her compliments, brought her flowers and gifts, and made an effort to keep her happy. As the years went by, the couple began dreaming of a bigger home, and eventually they started making that dream come true. They began building a large house with 5 bedrooms, a home cinema, a spacious wardrobe, a beautiful garden, and a garage big enough for 3 cars. The Korp were frugal people and had been saving for years to fund this project. Construction took several years, but in the end, they succeeded. It was a place Maria had never even dreamed of. She was very happy. She had a wonderful husband, children, and a beautiful home. But it had to be said, the couple cared a great deal about appearances. The house looked perfect on the outside, but inside there were a few flaws. The same was true of their marriage. As time passed, they still appeared to be in love, but cracks began to show. Joseph enjoyed experimenting in the bedroom, while Maria wasn't keen. Over time, she began spending more and more time at church and no longer wanted to sleep with her husband. They even started sleeping in separate rooms. The couple began to drift apart. Joseph started spending more and more time online. He created a profile on a chat website, pretending to be the owner of a construction company who was separated from his wife and looking for someone to spoil. His profile came across well, and there was no shortage of interested women. At first, it was just chatting, but soon he began meeting up with them. These were usually brief affairs, and Joseph gave false personal details. His affairs meant he was away from home more often, and Maria began to suspect he was being unfaithful. In September 2003, she confided her suspicions to her now adult daughter. Maria began watching her husband more closely, and she found proof of the infidelity. Among the evidence were messages exchanged with a woman and receipts for motels. Maria was furious, and there was a major row. At first, Joseph denied everything, but eventually he admitted it. He also claimed it was Maria's fault. She spent all day praying or on the phone with her sisters. Maria was livid at these accusations. She even considered divorce, but that conflicted with her religious beliefs. So she decided to try to save the marriage. She took her husband's criticism to heart and decided to change. She went on a diet, updated her wardrobe, and even accompanied him to a few swinger clubs. It was a massive step outside her comfort zone, but she was willing to do a great deal to salvage the marriage. Unfortunately, she noticed her efforts weren't making much difference. Joseph continued to come home late and spend time with other women. By early 2005, Maria had had enough. She threatened divorce, changed the locks, and threw Joseph out of the house. This time, Joseph realized it was serious and said he wanted to work on their relationship. He promised to end his affairs. It seemed like things might be repairable. Maria even told her friends that things were getting better until 9th February 2005. It was a Wednesday, and the day began as usual. Maria and her husband woke up early to get ready for work. At that time, they were working in separate factories. Around 6:30 a.m., Maria left the house as she normally did, and shortly after, her husband followed. Maria's daughter, Laura, was still living with them and also had a job, though she started later. When her parents left, she was still asleep. Everything was normal until midday, when the school their son attended called. They phoned Joseph to say no one had picked up Damien. It was always Maria who did that. Not only had she failed to collect their son, but no one could reach her. Joseph, of course, went to collect Damien himself, wondering why his wife hadn't done it, but he hoped there was a simple explanation. He assumed there must have been a miscommunication. Perhaps Maria had told him to pick up their son, but he hadn't heard her. Joseph picked up his son and drove home, where he waited for his wife. Evening was approaching, and Maria still hadn't returned. Even worse, she wasn't answering her phone. Joseph began to worry. He started calling Maria's friends, but no one knew anything. He eventually rang her workplace and was shocked to learn that Maria had never made it in that day. No one had heard from her. There was no way to contact her, and her disappearance was highly uncharacteristic. Maria was always responsible and well organized. The situation seemed very alarming, so a missing persons report was filed for the 50-year-old woman. The case was taken seriously right away, and the very next day the media published news of her disappearance, along with a description of her car. The investigation began, and a major breakthrough came just 4 days later when a caretaker noticed Maria's vehicle. In the boot, they found the missing woman, barely alive. Her condition was described as extremely critical from the start. Maria had suffered a head injury, but that was nothing compared to the marks on her neck. Someone had strangled her, cutting off her oxygen, and then placed her in the boot. It was likely that whoever had put her there believed she was already dead. She had spent 4 days in that hot, airless boot, with no food or water. Doctors gave her only a 25% chance of survival. Experts found that her brain had been deprived of oxygen for a prolonged period, and there was little hope it would function normally again. Maria was placed into a medically induced coma and kept alive by machines. Doctors could only wait, but the prognosis was grim. Meanwhile, detectives had to find out who was responsible. Joseph quickly became the prime suspect, and strangely, it was Maria herself who had pointed the finger at him. Some time before her disappearance, Maria had contacted a friend and handed her a bag full of evidence of her husband's infidelity. The bag contained printed emails with another woman and receipts, including for a motel. Maria had told her friend that if anything happened to her, she should give the bag to the police. Where had Maria got the idea that something might happen to her? As it turned out, she had a habit of visiting a psychic, and he had warned her that she was in danger, that something could happen to her, and that her husband might be involved. Maria had taken his words seriously. Joseph was also implicated by his own brother, who had voiced suspicions during the search for Maria. He already feared something bad had happened to his sister-in-law. Maria's daughter, Laura, also recalled something troubling. On the night of 9th February, the night Maria was attacked, Laura woke up and thought she heard her mother scream. When she went downstairs, she found Joseph, who told her everything was fine and that Maria had just had a bad dream. Laura went back to bed. Looking back, she realized that might have been the moment her mother was attacked, and that her stepfather might have been involved, but Joseph had an alibi. He had been at work all day, and his colleagues confirmed this. He had behaved normally, later picked up his son from school, and then began searching for his wife. There was no time unaccounted for, no window in which he could have attacked Maria, hidden her in the boot, abandoned the car, and returned to work. Investigators concluded that while Joseph might not have physically harmed Maria himself, he could have had help. And he did. Joseph had been having an affair with a woman named Tanya Herman for some time. The pair had met in 2003 in an online chat room. Tanya, born in 1966, was 8 years younger than Joseph. Her life had been fairly ordinary. She had 3 siblings, attended Catholic school as a child, came from a respectable family, and was sporty. As a young woman, she worked in a bridal gown shop and had a fascination with weddings and dresses. In 1987, at the age of 21, she got married herself, but her husband turned out to be abusive, and the relationship didn't last. Her next relationship resulted in pregnancy, and she gave birth to a daughter. Sadly, that relationship also ended, this time due to her partner's infidelity. Tanya did everything she could to support herself and her child. She moved to Melbourne, where she worked in an office job, starting at 5 a.m. and returning home late. It wasn't what she had dreamed of, but she had no one to help her. Her relationship with her family was strained. At 26, she began working as a waitress in a club where she met her next husband, Paul Herman, a sailor. They were in love and eventually had a daughter together, Taylor. But this marriage also ended in 2002, leaving Tanya alone with 2 children. She began looking after neighbors' children for extra income, but that job ended abruptly when 2 of the children broke their legs, and others complained that she locked them in a room. Her relationship with her older daughter also broke down. At the age of 13, the girl went to live with her father. Tanya had to find another job. She went back to waitressing, but she hated being alone. Around that time, she started visiting online chat rooms. That's where, in late 2003, she met Joseph, who had created a false identity. He told Tanya he was in the process of divorcing his wife and claimed he had 2 children, when in fact he had 3. Their first in-person meeting took place in February 2004, and from the very beginning, there was a spark between them. From that point on, they saw each other regularly. Tanya was smitten with him. Joseph, as always, was very charming. And it must be said, he was also very good at hiding things. He always made time for her and returned home late in the evenings. By the end of 2004, the couple had even rented a house together. This house was located not far from the one Joseph shared with his wife and children, but Tanya had no idea. Joseph even spent a considerable amount of money furnishing their new place, oddly choosing furniture that matched exactly what he had in his home with Maria. Even more striking, he enrolled Tanya's daughter in the same school his son attended. Eventually, Tanya began to suspect something. Joseph never moved in with her permanently. The truth came out. Joseph confessed that he was married and that his situation was quite different from what he had led her to believe. At first, Tanya was furious about the revelation, but she was so in love with him that she was willing to forgive him. She started watching Maria, observing her at the school gates when she dropped off or picked up her son. By late 2004, Joseph was making plans for a future with his mistress, while still married. Joseph's family admitted that he had been brazen enough to introduce Tanya to them. They had never liked Maria, perhaps because she had started a relationship with Joseph while he was still married to someone else. Some of them were even pleased to hear about a new woman in his life. Only Joseph's brother was reportedly disgusted by the situation. In December 2004, Joseph told a friend that he was in a new relationship and that he and Maria were getting divorced, although Maria herself had no idea. His family claimed he was madly in love, but of course if he were to divorce Maria, he would have to split his assets. During his first police interview, Joseph admitted to the affair, and he had an alibi. Tanya, on the other hand, had none. What's more, on the day Maria disappeared, Tanya had taken her daughter to school later than usual. Detectives decided to investigate her thoroughly. They searched her house and brought her in for questioning. That's when they found sports shoes in her wardrobe, stained with red marks. Lab tests confirmed the presence of Maria Korp's DNA. DNA matching Maria's was also found in the Korp family garage, leading investigators to believe that was where the attack took place. Maria had been walking to her car, about to leave for work, when she was allegedly attacked by Tanya, with Joseph possibly assisting her. Maria was then placed in the boot of her own car. Tanya drove off while Joseph went to work to establish his alibi. Initially, Tanya claimed she had nothing to do with the attack. She said that on the 9th of February, she had taken her daughter to school late because the girl had slept poorly and Tanya had let her sleep in. But during the first interview, it was clear she was nervous and hopelessly in love with Joseph. She spoke fondly of him, despite detectives not being interested in those details. The police soon realized Tanya would do almost anything for this man. Investigators believed both the husband and the mistress were responsible for what had happened to Maria. The shoes were evidence against Tanya, but Joseph denied everything. He claimed he had been trying to end the affair. Detectives had their suspicions, but no hard evidence. So they turned to Tanya's brother for help. He agreed to wear a wire and speak to his sister. It was a good move. Tanya quickly revealed the truth. According to her, Joseph had no intention of divorcing his wife because he didn't want to lose his wealth. He said Maria was standing in the way of their happiness and that it would be better if she were gone. He couldn't do it himself. Being the husband, he'd be the prime suspect. He needed someone to help him. That someone was Tanya. She agreed. She thought no one would go looking for Maria. Based on the recordings of that conversation, both Tanya and Joseph were arrested on the 16th of February 2005. Tanya confessed immediately, but her lover did not. He blamed it all on her. He claimed Tanya was jealous and had planned everything on her own. Tanya pleaded guilty without going to trial and was sentenced to 12 years in prison for causing grievous bodily harm to Maria Korp, who at the time was still in a coma. Months passed, but Maria never regained consciousness. The investigation continued. Joseph was released on bail. On the 9th of June, still insisting he was innocent, he filed a request to visit his wife in hospital. The request was approved. On the 26th of July, doctors concluded that further life support was futile. They recommended withdrawing artificial life support and stopping her feeding. The decision was controversial. Protests took place outside the hospital. Maria's family strongly opposed the move. Sadly, on the 5th of August 2005, Maria passed away. Her funeral was held on the 12th of August. On the day of the funeral, Joseph called his first wife and a journalist, telling them he intended to end his life. Emergency services rushed to his home. They found Joseph standing on a stool in the garage, a noose around his neck. When he saw the rescuers, he followed through with his plan. He could not be saved. Next to Joseph, they found photographs of his wife, football memorabilia, and a note in which he continued to claim his innocence. Had the case gone to trial, proving his guilt might not have been easy. In 2013, Tanya filed a request to marry another female inmate, but the request was denied. A year later, Tanya was released. Her fiancé was waiting for her. Maria Korp's death shocked the nation. A woman betrayed by the man she loved and ultimately abandoned in the name of selfish desire. Though Tanya served her sentence and Joseph escaped justice through death, the true cost was paid by Maria, whose voice was forever silenced. Her story remains a haunting reminder of how deception and obsession can lead to unthinkable tragedy. And what do you think? Was Joseph guilty? Let me know in the comments.